The desert stretched for miles, empty and endless. The sun burned hot during the day, and the cold wind cut sharp at night. On the edge of that desert stood a small wooden ranch. Its roof sagged, the paint had peeled away, and the wooden fence leaned like an old man's back. Inside lived a human rancher. He had been alone for many years. His hair had turned gray, his hands were rough from hard work, and his eyes carried the weight of silence. Every morning he woke before the sun, fed the animals, and worked the land. Every night he sat by the fire, listening only to the howl of coyotes and the whisper of wind. He did not laugh. He did not speak. There was no one left to listen. The ranch had once been full of life. His wife had died many years ago. His children had grown and left, never to return. Neighbors had moved away, and slowly the world had forgotten about him. The rancher accepted his loneliness like he accepted the dust in the air. It was simply part of life. But on one strange night, something changed. The moon rose red over the desert, casting long shadows across the land. The rancher sat on his porch with a cup of black coffee in his hand. The night was quiet, too quiet. The coyotes were silent. The wind had died. The rancher felt the stillness press against his chest like a warning. Then he saw movement. At first, he thought it was a trick of the shadows. But no shapes were moving at the far edge of his land. 11 figures, cloaked and slow, walking across the dry earth. Their steps were heavy, as if every one of them carried sorrow on their shoulders. The rancher stood up, his old bones aching. He reached for his rifle, the same rifle that had hung above his door for decades. His heart began to beat harder. Strangers never came this far out. Not at night. Not in silence. As the figures came closer, the rancher could hear faint voices. They were speaking, but not in English. The sounds were strange, sharp and soft all at once. A language he had never heard before. His hand tightened on the rifle. Finally, the figures reached his porch. 11 of them, tall and thin, their faces hidden under torn hoods. The rancher aimed his gun at them, his voice rough from years without. "Use, stay back." The tallest of the strangers lifted her head. The hood fell, and the rancher froze. Her skin was pale blue, glowing faintly under the moonlight. Her eyes were large, shimmering like water. She was not human. None of them were. The rancher's breath caught in his throat. For years he had heard stories of wars beyond Earth, of aliens crossing stars, but he had never believed them. Now 11 stood before him. The woman stepped forward slowly, her hands raised. Her voice trembled when she spoke, but her words, though broken, were clear. "Shelter. We need shelter." The others lowered their hoods. Their faces were the same different shades of alien beauty, but all filled with exhaustion and grief. The rancher did not lower his rifle. "Why here?" he asked, his voice sharp. The woman's lips trembled. "Widows, all of us. Our husbands. Gone. Killed. No home. No world. Only this." Her hand motioned to the desert. "We beg you." The rancher's chest tightened. For years he had lived in silence. He had turned away from the world. Now 11 strangers, not even human, stood on his porch, begging for a chance to live. Every part of him screamed to shut the door, to send them away, to keep his peace. But as he looked at their eyes full of pain, fear, and hunger, something inside him shifted. They were not just strangers. They were lost souls. The wind rose again, carrying sand across the land. The rancher looked at the night sky, at the red moon hanging like an omen. His life had been silent for too long. Perhaps silence was about to end. He lowered the rifle, though his hand still shook. "Come inside," he muttered. "Before the cold kills you." The widows looked at one another. Relief spread across their faces. Slowly, carefully, they stepped inside the ranch. The old wooden floor creaked under their weight. The rancher closed the door behind them. his heart heavy with doubt. He had broken his own rule. He had let strangers into his quiet life. As the fire crackled in the small cabin, the widows huddled together, whispering in their strange language. The rancher poured water into cups, watching them with wary eyes. He did not yet know who hunted them. He did not yet know what danger he had invited onto his land. But deep in his chest he felt it. The silence of his ranch was gone, and in its place, something far more dangerous had arrived. The desert outside grew darker. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, engines rumbled. And the rancher understood. Was only the beginning. The cabin was small, lit only by the orange glow of the fire. The alien widows sat close together on the floor, their cloaks wrapped around their thin bodies. Their strange faces flickered in the light, beautiful but weary. The rancher kept his rifle resting across his knees, his eyes never leaving them. For a long time no one spoke. Only the crackle of burning wood filled the silence. Finally, the tallest of them lifted her head. Her glowing eyes locked on the rancher's. "We thank you," she said, her voice heavy with an accent. "We will not stay long, just one night, just safe place." The rancher's lips pressed into a hard line. He had heard those words before, many years ago, from drifters and liars. One night often became two. Two became forever. He sipped his black coffee, his gaze sharp. "Where are you from?" he asked. The woman lowered her eyes. "Not here," she whispered. "Not this world. We fled." Another widow, younger, leaned forward. Her hands trembled as she clutched the cup of water he had given. "Our men are dead. All of them. Taken. In battle," her voice cracked. "We had no home left. Only the stars. And the stars gave us nothing but cold." The rancher said nothing. He had buried his own wife years ago, dug the grave with his own hands in the hard desert soil. He knew the weight of loss. But his grief had been silent. Theirs burned like fire. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Why here? Why my ranch? You walked across a whole desert to find one old man's door. Don't make sense." The tall widow looked at him again. "Because it is far," she said simply. "Far from city, far from eyes. We thought, maybe no one here. Maybe safe." Her words made his gut twist. Safe from what? Before he could ask, a sound cut through the night. It was faint, so faint he almost thought he imagined it. A low hum carried on the wind. The rancher froze. His ears, trained by years of silence, picked it up clearly. Engines. The widows heard it too. Their heads snapped toward the door. Fear filled their glowing eyes. The youngest one began to shake. "They are close," she whispered in her strange tongue. The rancher stood, setting his rifle in his hands. "Who?" he demanded. His voice was a growl now. "Who's out there?" The tall widow's face turned pale. She rose slowly, standing in the flickering light. "Hunters," she said. "They follow us across worlds. They do not stop." The rancher's jaw tightened. "And you brought them here," he muttered, anger burning in his chest. He had lived alone for years, untouched by war or strangers. Now in one night his silence was shattered, and danger had walked right into his cabin. The widows bowed their heads, shame heavy on their shoulders. The youngest sobbed quietly, whispering in her own language. The rancher's instincts screamed at him. Throw them out. Lock the door. Let the desert take them. But then he saw it. The youngest widow, her hands shook so badly she spilled her water. She was little more than a girl, her eyes wide with terror. Her body trembled like a leaf in the storm. The rancher's heart cracked. Once, long ago, his own daughter had looked at him with eyes like that, scared, small, trusting him to keep her safe. He lowered his rifle slowly. "Sit down," he said. "All of you." The widows obeyed, huddling close again. The hum of the engines faded into the night. Whoever was out there had passed for now. But the rancher knew the truth. They would be back. The firelight flickered across his lined face. He stared at the widows, at the fear in their eyes, and he realized something. He was no longer alone. Silence of the desert had been broken, and in its place came whispers of war. He tightened his grip on the rifle. "Listen close," he said. His voice was rough, but steady. "If you're staying here, even one night, you'll follow my rules. You don't leave the cabin after dark. You don't make noise outside. And if those hunters come again, we fight." The widows exchanged nervous glances. Some nodded, some looked down. The tall one, their leader, met his eyes. For the first time her voice carried strength. "Then we fight," she said. The rancher leaned back, staring into the fire. His heart was heavy. For years he had asked for nothing but silence. Now silence was gone forever. Outside, the desert stretched wide and black. The moon hung high, watching. Somewhere in that darkness, engines waited. And the rancher knew this was only the beginning. The cabin smelled of smoke and dry wood. The rancher moved slowly across the kitchen, his boots heavy against the old floorboards. He pulled out a dented pot, poured in beans, and set it over the fire. His movements were quiet, but his eyes never left the strangers huddled on his floor. The alien widows sat close together, whispering in their strange tongue. Their cloaks were ragged, their faces pale with exhaustion. They looked like they hadn't eaten in days. Their eyes, large, glowing faintly, watched every move the rancher made. He had fed strays before, hungry dogs, wandering coyotes, but never this. Never beings from beyond the stars. The beans boiled slowly. He dropped in hard bread to soften and stirred with a wooden spoon. The smell filled the cabin. His own stomach growled, but he ignored it. Finally he set out bowls, 11 in a line on the table. The widows hesitated, unsure. The rancher tapped the wooden surface with his spoon. "Eat," he said, his voice rough. The tallest one stood first. She moved with a strange grace, her cloak slipping back. Scars ran across her arms, pale against her glowing skin. She picked up the bowl carefully, as if it were treasure. Then, she knelt and handed it to the youngest widow first. The rancher frowned. That detail struck him. Hunger burned in all their eyes, yet not one touched food until the youngest had eaten. The girl's thin fingers shook as she lifted the spoon. She sipped, then closed her eyes as if the taste alone was enough to bring tears. Only then did the others begin to eat, quietly, carefully. The rancher sat in his chair, chewing slowly, watching. Their silence was heavy, their manners too perfect, like soldiers, or survivors of something worse. After a long while, he broke the silence. "You ran from war?" he asked. The tall widow lowered her spoon. Her gaze met his across the fire. "Yes, war that never ends. Our men fought, our men died, we were left." Another widow, older, spoke up. Her voice was deep, cracked with sorrow. "We buried them under broken skies. Then we ran, but war follows." The rancher's jaw tightened. "And now it follows you here." The room froze. The widows lowered their heads. None answered. Only the fire cracked in the silence. The rancher's chest filled with unease. He had once seen battle long ago, when Earth had fought its own small wars. He knew the look of hunted people, and he knew the danger that trailed them. The widows finished their meal quietly. The youngest leaned against the tall one, drifting into sleep. The others kept watchful eyes on the door and window, as if expecting shadows to break in at any moment. Finally, the rancher stood. He gathered the empty bowls, setting them by the sink. "One night," he said firmly. "Tomorrow you move on." The tall widow rose to her feet. She stood taller than him now, her glowing eyes meeting his with quiet strength. "If we move on, we die," she said. "If we stay, maybe we live." "Maybe you live too." The rancher's brows furrowed. "What do you mean, me?" The widow's lips parted, but before she could answer, the sound came again. that low, distant. Engines, closer this time, the widow stiffened. One of them whispered a prayer in her strange tongue. The youngest whimpered in her sleep, clutching her cloak tighter. The rancher moved to the window. He pushed aside the curtain and stared. Into the desert night. Nothing but blackness. Yet the sound was real steady growing. His stomach sank. Whoever hunted them was near. Maybe already circling his land. He turned back to the widows. "You brought hell to my door," he growled. The tall widow stepped closer, her voice sharp now. "We did not choose this. But you must choose now. Alone, you are nothing. With us, you have a chance." Her words hit him hard. For years, he had lived with silence, lived with nothing but dust and ghosts. Now 11 strangers stood in his home, hunted by something far worse than coyotes or thieves. He gripped his rifle tight. His heart pounded like it had not in years. Faded again, swallowed by the desert night. But the rancher knew it would return, louder, closer. He looked at the widows, at their tired faces, their haunted eyes. He hated them for bringing danger. Yet something in him, deep down, refused to cast them out. He sighed, shoulders heavy. "You can stay, for now. But if trouble comes, don't expect me to die easy." The tall widow's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Not joy, something darker. A promise. You will not die easy," she said softly. "Not while we breathe." The rancher sat back down, staring at the fire. His ranch was no longer silent. His life was no longer his own. And as the night deepened, one truth grew clear. This first meal was not peace. It was the start of war. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. The widows stayed close to the cabin. They worked without being asked, patching the broken fence, hauling water from the well, sweeping the porch. Their movements were quick, practiced, almost military. The rancher noticed how they always worked in pairs, never alone, as if expecting attack at any moment. The ranch itself began to change. Where silence once ruled, now soft voices filled the air. The widows spoke in their strange language, their tones low and careful. Sometimes the rancher caught fragments of English broken. Words whispered warnings. He pretended not to listen, but every syllable lodged itself in his mind. At night, the widows huddled together, their glowing eyes reflecting firelight. The youngest one clung to the tall widow, the leader, as if she were the last piece of safety. In a cruel universe, the rancher would sit in his chair, rifle across his lap, staring at the door. Sleep rarely came. It was during one of those nights that he heard it again. The hum, faint at first, like a mosquito in the dark, then stronger. Deeper, rolling across the desert like thunder without clouds. The rancher rose slowly, his old knees creaking. He pushed aside the curtain. Out beyond the horizon, the sky flickered. Not lightning, not fire, something else. Something alien. Engines. The widow stiffened. One of them hissed something sharp in their tongue, and instantly they formed a half circle. Around the youngest girl, shielding her with their bodies, the rancher's chest tightened. They had done this before. Too many times. He stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool, the desert wide and endless. The lights on the horizon blinked, then faded, as if whoever was out there didn't want to be seen. But he knew better. Hunters don't hide because they are weak. Hunters hide because they are waiting. The tall widow followed him out, her cloak brushing the wood. She stood beside him in silence for a long moment, then spoke softly. "They have found our scent," the rancher spat into the dirt. "And they'll follow it straight to my door." Her glowing eyes shifted toward him. Yes. For a long moment, neither spoke. The desert stretched before them, wide and merciless. Then the rancher turned to her. "Tell me the truth. Who are they?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. At last she said, "Mercenaries. Paid to erase what is left of us. They killed our husbands. They burned our world. They will not stop until the last of us are gone." The rancher studied her face. There was no lie there, only grief and something harder. Vengeance. He looked back at the horizon. The lights were gone now, but the silence of the desert had changed. It felt heavy, watching, waiting. He tightened his grip on the rifle. "If they come here, I'll fight. But don't think for a second I'm doing this for you." The widow's eyes softened. "We know, but fight you will." The rancher went back inside, the widow following. The fire burned low, casting shadows across the walls. The widows were awake, their eyes glowing like stars in the dark. They had not slept, they were listening, just as he was, the youngest. One looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. "Will they come tonight?" She whispered in broken English that the rancher's throat tightened. For a moment, he saw his daughter again in that girl's face. He set the rifle down gently. "Not tonight," he lied, "but soon." The girl nodded, pressing her face against the tall widow's arm. The rancher sat in his chair, staring into the flames. His ranch was no longer his own. The widows had brought their war to his doorstep, and whether he wanted it or not, he was part of it now. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. The rancher's eyes flicked to the window. Outside, the desert lay silent, but the silence no longer felt safe. It felt like a trap. He whispered to himself, too soft for them to hear. "They're coming." And somewhere beyond the horizon, hidden in the endless dark, engines rumbled again, closer this time. The night came heavy and black. No stars, no moon, just darkness pressing against the cabin walls. The widows huddled close, their glowing eyes sharp and restless. The rancher sat in his chair with the rifle across his lap, his boots planted. Firm on the wooden floor, he had felt war before. He could smell it now in the air. The sound came first, a distant hum, steady, crawling across the desert like a storm rolling in. Then lights sharp, white beams cutting through the black horizon. Dust rose with the engines, shimmering in the glow. The widows stood as one, their cloaks falling back. The youngest whimpered, but the tall widow pulled her close. Her voice was low, firm. "It begins." The rancher stood, cocking the rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered. But the tall widow stepped forward, her jaw tight. "No, we fight with you." Before he could argue, the ground shook. The engines roared louder. Shadows swarmed at the edge of his land. Men, no, not men. Armored figures, tall and brutal, weapons glowing in their hands. Mercenaries. The hunters thought they spread out like wolves, circling the cabin. Their leader shouted in a guttural alien tongue. The widows stiffened. The rancher didn't understand the words, but he knew the meaning well enough. "Kill." He raised his rifle, sighted down the barrel, and fired. The crack of the shot split the caseput. Night. One raider fell, screaming in the dust. For a moment, the desert went silent. Then all hell broke loose. Bolts of burning light tore through the night sky, striking the cabin walls. Wood splintered. Flames licked at the roof. The rancher fired again and again, his old muscles straining, his blood roaring in his ears. The widows did not hide. They moved like shadows, fast and silent. One darted through the door, leaping at a mercenary with claws the rancher had never seen before. Another raised her hands, light sparked from her palms, striking an enemy in the chest. The mercenary collapsed, his armor smoking. The rancher froze for half a second, stunned. They had powers, skills. They were not helpless widows at all. They were survivors, yes, but survivors with teeth. A shout snapped him back. He ducked as a blast tore through the window, scorching the wall. He rolled, aimed, fired. Another raider dropped. The cabin burned hotter now. Smoke filled the air, choking and thick. The widows fought fiercely, their cloaks torn, their glowing eyes blazing with fury. The youngest stayed hidden behind a barrel, trembling, but the others shielded her with their lives. The rancher's lungs ached. His shoulder bruised from the recoil, but he refused to fall. He loaded, fired, cursed, bled. Every shot bought them one more breath. Then he saw him, the leader, a towering figure in jagged black armor, standing at the edge of the firelight. His helmet gleamed, his weapon humming with deadly power. He did not rush the cabin. He simply watched, patient, like a predator waiting for prey to tire. The rancher's blood ran cold. This was no common mercenary. This was a warlord. The tall widow noticed him too. Her face hardened. She hissed to the others in their tongue, and instantly they drew back, circling the youngest girl again. The warlord lifted his weapon. The rancher knew in his gut one strike from that thing would level his cabin and all inside. "Run!" The rancher roared, but the widows didn't move. They stood their ground, eyes glowing, ready to face death together. The warlord raised his arm. Light built, bright and blinding. The rancher aimed his rifle, teeth clenched. He knew his bullet was nothing against that armor, but he would not lower his gun. Not now, not ever. The desert trembled, the flames roared. The widows cried out as the warlord's weapon reached its peak dot, and then the sky itself split open. A deafening crack tore across the desert. Lightning without clouds flashed overhead. The warlord froze, his weapon's glow faltering. The widows gasped. Even the ranchers' hearts stopped. Something else had arrived. Something bigger. The night was no longer just a fight for survival. It was the opening move in a war he never asked for. Asterisk flames ate the cabin. The old wood groaned and cracked, smoke curling into the night sky. Sparks rained down like burning stars, stinging skin and filling lungs. The rancher coughed hard, his eyes watering. He stumbled through the haze with his rifle gripped tight. Every breath was fire in his chest, but still he fought. Every time he pulled the trigger, another mercenary dropped. But for each one he cut down, two more appeared out of the smoke. The widows moved around him like shadows. They did not scream. They did not panic. They fought with sharp precision. One clawed through an enemy's helmet, her hands glowing with strange power. Another grabbed a mercenary's weapon and turned it back on him, blasting his armored chest into ash. The rancher realized then, they weren't just survivors. They were warriors who had once stood beside their husbands on battlefields, and yet, even warriors bled. A widow cried out as a blast struck her side. She fell, clutching the wound, her glowing blood spilling across the dirt. The youngest screamed. But the tall widow yanked her back, shielding her from sight. The rancher fired again, rage burning hot in his chest. He had buried his wife long ago, but he would not bury these women too. Not while he drew breath. The smoke thickened. The cabin roof split, fire crashing down. The widows pulled the youngest outside, into the desert night. The rancher followed, coughing, his rifle still hot in his hands. The battlefield spread before him. His once silent ranch was a war zone, fences broken, the well shattered, the barn blazing. Mercenaries swarmed the land, their weapons glowing like lightning in the dark. And at the edge of it all stood the warlord, the towering figure in black armor. He had not yet moved, but his presence alone bent the night around him. His weapon hummed with deadly power, its glow brightening with each passing second. The tall widow stepped forward. Her voice cut through the chaos, sharp and defiant. "He is not for you," she told the rancher. "He is for us." But the warlord lifted his weapon, and the desert shook. The rancher didn't think. He acted. He lifted his rifle and charged forward. His boots pounded against the burning earth, his lungs screaming for air. He fired again and again, bullets sparking off the warlord's armor like pebbles against steel. The warlord didn't even flinch. The rancher felt heat slam into his side. A blast had struck him. He staggered, pain ripping through his ribs, but still he ran. Blood soaked his shirt, but his eyes locked on the warlord. Behind him, the widows shouted in their strange tongue. They spread out, circling, their glowing eyes blazing with fury. One leapt high, claws out, striking at the warlord's helmet. He swatted her aside like dust. Another widow rushed from the left, energy glowing in her palms. The warlord raised his weapon, and she vanished in a flash of fire. The rancher roared. His voice was raw, primal. He raised his rifle for one final shot aimed at the warlord's weapon. The bullet struck true. Sparks burst, the weapon's glow faltering. For a heartbeat, the warlord's arm dropped. The widows seized the moment. Together, they struck, their powers clashing like storms against his armor. Light exploded across the desert. The ground split. Fire and smoke swirled, blinding and deafening. The rancher was thrown to the ground. His head hit hard the world. Spinning, he tasted blood. His vision blurred, but through the haze he saw them, the widows locked in battle, their screams carrying into the night. And then he saw her, the youngest widow. She stood apart, trembling, her small hands raised. She had not fought before. She had only watched, hidden and protected. But now, light flickered between her palms, faint at first, then brighter, hotter, stronger. The warlord turned his head toward her. Even through the armor, the rancher felt the weight of that gaze. The girl's eyes glowed like twin suns. The rancher's heart froze. She was no helpless child. She was something more. Something dangerous. The ground shook as her light built higher. Brighter, blinding. The widows cried out. The warlord raised his weapon again. The rancher tried to rise, blood running down his side, but his body would not obey. He reached out, his voice breaking. No, the desert exploded with light, and then everything went black. The desert was silent again, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence after fire, after death. Smoke hung heavy over the ranch. The cabin was gone, burned to black skeleton wood. The fences lay broken, the animals scattered. Ash drifted in the night air like gray snow. The rancher groaned, forcing himself up from the dirt. His ribs screamed with pain, blood soaking his shirt. He should have been dead, but he wasn't, not yet. He spat into the dust, lifted his head and saw the battlefield. The widows stood in a broken line, their bodies bruised and burned, but still upright. They formed a half circle around the youngest girl, who now glowed faintly with leftover power. Her small body shook from the effort, her hands trembling. Whatever she had unleashed had stopped the warlord's weapon, but it had not stopped him. The warlord still stood. His black armor was scorched, cracked in places, smoke curling from its joints. But he did not fall, he did not break. His tall frame loomed in the firelight, his glowing eyes burning from behind the helmet. He stepped forward, slow and steady, dragging his massive weapon through the dirt. Every step echoed like thunder. Widows braced themselves, hissing in their strange tongue. Their claws sparked with light. Their eyes glowed brighter, though exhaustion weighed on them. They had lost one sister already. They would not lose the rest. The rancher staggered forward, his rifle heavy in his hands. He had no bullets left. The chamber clicked empty. Still, he lifted it, pointing it straight at the warlord. His voice broke the silence. Rough, low, steady. Not one more step. The warlord paused. His helmet turned toward the rancher. For the first time, he spoke in a deep, guttural voice that scraped like iron on stone. Human, he growled. You should have stayed in your silence. The rancher spat blood into the dirt. And you should have stayed the hell off my land. The warlord raised his weapon, light building once more. The ground shook under its power. The tall widow stepped in front of the rancher, her glowing eyes hard. She spread her arms, her voice sharp. Together. She shouted to her sisters. The widows answered. They formed a circle, joining hands. Power sparked between them, weaving like lightning. The youngest stood at the center, her body trembling as the energy flowed into her. Her eyes burned brighter and brighter until she looked like a star trapped in human form. The rancher felt the hair on his arms rise. The air itself hummed. He had never seen such power, never felt such fear and awe at once. The warlord roared and charged. His weapon blazed like a sun, fire and death in his hands. The rancher didn't run. He didn't hide. He tightened his grip on the useless rifle and stepped forward beside the widow's. His heart hammered, his body broken, but he stood tall. "If this is the end," he muttered, "then I'll meet it on my feet." The youngest widow screamed, and the circle erupted. Light exploded outward, blinding, burning. The widows' voices rose together in a cry of fury and grief. Energy lanced into the warlord, slamming into his armor, cracking it open with each strike. The rancher's eyes widened as he saw it, the dark metal splitting. The monster inside revealed. The warlord staggered, roaring, but he did not fall. He lifted his weapon high, ready to crush them all in one final blow. The rancher acted without thinking. He dropped his empty rifle and grabbed a broken fence post from the ground. With a roar, he charged straight at the warlord. His body screamed in pain, but he didn't stop. He drove the wooden post like a spear, slamming it into the crack in the warlord's armor. The warlord bellowed, stumbling. The widows seized the chance. Their light surged, brighter than the sun. And then silence. The desert lit up in one final explosion of fire and light. The shockwave rolled across the land, flattening what was left of the ranch, scattering ash into the sky. When the dust settled, the rancher lay on his back, staring at the stars. His body ached, his chest barely rising. Beside him, the widows knelt in the dirt, their eyes dim, their cloaks torn. The warlord was gone, whether dead or driven back into the dark, none could say. The youngest girl crawled to the rancher's side. Her small hand touched his chest, glowing faintly. Her voice was soft, almost like a child's. "You fought for us." The rancher coughed, a weak laugh breaking his lips. "No," he whispered. "I fought for my home." But as his eyes closed, he knew the truth. His home was no longer just the ranch. It was them, the widows. The desert was silent again. But this silence was different. This silence carried promise. The war was not over. It had only begun. Asterisk.